I give special thanks to the earth, to the air, the wind, the sun, the water, for life, for everything that we have. This is something we should do every day. In the native way, vegetables are people too. They're just a different kind of people. The plants, they communicate. They communicate in a different way. But they are people too. They are a nation. So we can say, Wachcha Oyate, the flower people. I'm not talking about hippies. I'm talking about actual flowers. They communicate. And for those of you who have plants, when you talk to your plants, eventually you begin to see how they respond. They feel you. That's because they're alive. Of course they're alive. So we give thanks to the plants for our food too. Vegetarians, they'll say, well, I can't eat any meat because that's a living, growing thing and my body doesn't need that. Then they just devour vegetables like nothing. But they don't realize vegetables are people too. So you give thanks when you take one. And you promise that you will live a good life and you will feed anybody who comes to your house who's hungry, that you will feed them with that food. This also includes vegetables. You give thanks to the vegetables because they're nations. That's the native way. I know a lot of vegetarians, they like to say, well, yeah, we take vegetables when they're ripe. That's when their life is over. No, it's not. When a vegetable or fruit is ripe, their life is not over. They're in what you call their prime. They're not finished. So you are taking a life. That's why in the native way, you give something back. When I was a little boy, in the summertime, around July, August, my mother would go choke cherry picking because that's when they're ripe. And when we go, she knows where all the good places are out in the country where she grew up. So we'd pack a picnic basket because we're going to be out there all day. So she'd pack home fried chicken and boiled potatoes, a watermelon, and then we would go out into the country and drive the car way out in the middle of nowhere to all these creeks and where the cherry trees are. And then we would start picking choke cherries. She had all these plastic pails. In America, you have these 1-gallon ice cream pails, and that's what they use. And you fill them up with choke cherries. And one time, we were at this big choke cherry tree, and she said a prayer in Lakota. And then she broke a branch off, a complete branch, and she gave it to me. She said, here, go. You can go sit over there, and you can walk around and play. You have a branch, and there's choke cherries on it. It was so cool. Yes, I had this tree branch, and the choke cherries. They hang like grapes. They look like miniature grapes. So you have this tree branch, and there's a whole bunch of choke cherries on there. And it makes you feel good, yeah, because you have all this sweetness. This is nature sweets, not candy bars. There's no candy bars. We didn't eat candy bars when we were kids. We didn't eat chocolate when we were kids. We ate choke cherries and plums. That's what we ate. We would go out into the country with our parents, and when the fruits are ripe, that's when they go plum picking and choke cherry picking. This is what we had. We didn't have computers, smartphones, and cable TV. We would go pick choke cherries, pick plums, go fishing, sometimes ride horse, go swimming. That was our summer. I'm so glad that I experienced that. Because that's what makes you strong. And you have a strong mind too. But today's kids, They just play with video games on the smartphone, on the computer. They don't have any clue. And I think when they do that, they're sick. Because look at all the poison they're putting in their body. They're just young, 2, 3, 4 years old. And all they're eating is potato chips and candy bars and orange pop. This is what they're programming, they're poisoning their body with. And I don't really think they can be happy because they're sick. They don't run around. They don't go out into nature. They don't climb trees. They don't swim. They don't go canoeing. They don't go fishing. They don't go running around. They stay in their home and play on the computer and eat junk food all day long. You have a bunch of obese kids walking around. That's sad. So I'm glad I grew up during that time period. Picking choke cherries. Oh, that was nice. Yeah. But before my mom would break a branch, she would say a prayer. And later I asked her about that, and she said, these are people. These cherries, these are people. So we apologize, and we have to say thank you, and we promise that we're going to feed anybody who is hungry. That's what she said. So in those days, that's what the ladies did. They would say these prayers. Sometimes they sing a song too. And then when you're done, you say thank you. You say your vows that you'll feed people with this. Because from choke cherries comes wojapi and wasna. Wasna is choke cherries and deer meat, dried deer meat. You get some dried deer meat and you pound it until it's like a powder. And then you mix some choke cherries in there and mix it all together. Oh my God, that is... I haven't eaten wasna since 2002. That's like a Lakota candy bar. Seriously. What you do is, with this pounded deer meat, you mix some choke cherries in there, and you mix it all together and pound it up. Even the seeds, you pound the choke cherry seeds because this adds a flavor. So you're pounding all of that up, you mix it together, and then you put it in someplace cool. Long time ago, in the ancient times, they put it under the ground. But today, people put it in their refrigerator or their basement. It has to be a cool place, and you have to let it sit there for about a day or two. Then after that, it's ready to eat. It's like a candy bar. But there's nothing bad in this candy bar. It's all good food. It's cherries and deer meat. No additives. That's how I grew up. But today, when people make wasna, they put sugar in it because people need their sugar today. So it's really sad. I myself, I don't really like to eat wasna that has sugar in it because to me, that's not wasna. You might as well go buy a candy bar because to me, it doesn't taste right. When you have wasna with sugar, it just doesn't taste right. Same thing for wojapi. Wojapi is when you ground up choke cherries with a rock, and then you smash it all up until it's like hamburger. And then you make patties, like hamburger patties. And then you put sticks around it and you dry it in the sun. And then you dry it, then you put it in someplace cool. And then later you can boil some water and you put these patties in there till they soften. Today people put pieces of bread in there too. And then you boil this and mix it together, and voila, you have wojapi. Choke cherry wojapi. And then with fry bread. Fry bread is not traditional, but but you mix that fry bread with wojapi, and oh my God. Wojapi na wiggly unkahapi kilila loachin yellow. That means I'm really hungry for wojapi and fry bread. In the traditional way of hunting, you make an apology to the animal nations. If you take something, you will give something back. So you don't take pictures holding a deer head and smiling and posting it on Facebook and say, look at what I did. This is really disrespectful to the animal. I just saw something like that and it just disgusted me because that's life. It's not just an animal, it is life. And when you are taking it for food, you have to be thankful for that. You have to give something back in return. And don't cut its head off and mount it on your wall. If you're going to do that, you might as well do that to your father. Dig his grave up, cut his head off, mount it, put it on a wall. Because this is a very big disgrace to the animal people. Everybody should have more respect for all of life, and not just human life, but all life. That's why in traditional hunting, you always apologize for taking something, and then you make a vow that you will feed the people with it. When hunters went out hunting, and if one guy brought down a lot of animals, that doesn't mean they're all for him. No. He's doing this to feed everybody. He's playing his part. Since he's really good at hunting, that means more people will be fed. He's doing it for the community. He's not doing it for himself or just his family. He's doing it for the community. And if anybody needs clothes, well, it's going to come from there. If anybody needs a teepee covering, it's going to come from there. If anybody needs a blanket for the winter, it's coming from there. If anybody needs tools, it's coming from there. But you always give something back. You can't just take. Of course, hardly anybody does that today. Even native people don't do that. I know a lot of native people who hunt just like everybody else. They get some cases of beer and go out into the country and go hunting. And after they kill a deer, they take the head to the taxidermist, who the taxidermist will stuff the head and put it on a wood so they can put it in the wall of their house. This is not respectful to the animals. Absolutely not. On Lakota reservation, there's a cultural center. And originally it was supposed to be a big complex, and it was supposed to have a museum, a library, and a performance hall to have events, cultural events, and things like that. And due to tribal politics, mismanagement of funds, and other corruption that's common to tribal politics, it never was finished. Just the basic part of the structure is there. But they still use it. If you walk into the main arena, one of the first things you're going to see is a buffalo head. And I find that just disgusting. And this has been there since 1990. And people would have bingo in this hall, and they would smoke. So just imagine all this cigarette smoke getting on this buffalo head, and everything about that shows me that the people in charge of that building and the people who go there do not really know Lakota beliefs. Or if they do, they are disrespecting it. Because the first wrong thing is you don't cut a buffalo head off and hang it on the wall. That's the first wrong thing. The second wrong thing is the smoking. The smoking that happens there. That to me is really disrespectful. It's like saying, well, hey, why don't we just go dig up the people at a gravesite, cut their heads off, and put them on the wall too. And then we'll stand there and smoke cigarettes under their heads. Why don't we go ahead and do that? Because that's the same thing that they're doing to this buffalo head. Especially when we have a story that talks about how we and the buffalo are closest relatives. That what happens to them happens to us, and what happens to us happens to them. So if we help them, they help us. That's a beautiful, beautiful concept. But yet, there's that buffalo head hanging on the wall, people going in there, smoking cigarettes, and it's just incredibly disrespectful. And it shows you how much Lakota people have changed. It shows you that we are not respectful to all of life like our ancestors were. Europeans really fantasize about Indians, and they think that all Indians are close to Mother Earth. They think that all Indians are mystical, and they call us the red people, and they call our ways the red way, and this is all 100% bullshit. Red does not represent Indians. Red represents life because it's the color of blood. It does not represent Indians. It never did. It's Christopher Columbus who said that. And today's Indian way is not even close to what our ancestors lived. Back in the late 1800s, when we were placed on reservations, there were prison camps in the beginning. And this is a situation where we couldn't leave. We were not allowed to hunt. Our knives and guns were taken from us. And we were only allowed to eat whatever the American government gave to us, which was really no good food. The quality of the food was okay when it left places like Chicago and stuff like that. But once it got to some of these train stations between there and the reservation, a lot of these handlers would sell it. And then they would buy old food and put that in there instead, and these middlemen would make a lot of money. So what we got on a reservation was bullshit food. It was really no good. And we ended up getting all kinds of diseases like heart diseases, hypertension, diabetes, things like that. And then at the same time, our language and ceremonies were declared illegal by the United States. So we were hit physically, spiritually, and emotionally. Soon after that, our minds became weak. These are the four parts of the South. So with the four parts of the South being sick, we lost our connection to our sacred center. So we started to focus on communicating away from that. And then the priests came from the various churches, and they learned our ways and said that since our ways conflict with the Bible, that our ways are evil, that they come from Satan. They come from the devil. So in our weakened states, we slowly began to accept that. Now, another thing is that there were some Lakota people that didn't want to accept that. They wanted to hang on to the traditional Lakota Star Knowledge ways. And if they revolted, they were sent to a mental hospital in Canton, South Dakota, which was set up for all reluctant Indians in America that did not want to become Christianized. They were sent there. And these church priests also committed the medicine men, medicine women, holy men, holy women. They committed all of them to these mental asylums too. This way, the people would not go to them for help, that they would come to the churches. They wanted the Indian people to only go to the priests and not their traditional healers. So they sent the healers to this mental asylum to die. And if you are radical, you were sent there to die too. So while this is happening, the priests are saying to Indian people, if you believe our way, we will help your children. And so it was a very, very dire straits time. And so a lot of Indians became Christians because of that. Like I said, we were weak-minded too at that point. And those who stuck it out, there were people who refused to accept Christianity, but they went to church anyway. What they were doing was they were putting up a candy store front. On the outside, they were acting like good little Christian Indians, but on the inside they weren't. They were Star Knowledge people. They did this because they didn't want to get sent to that mental asylum to die. That's sad, isn't it? But that's part of what happened back then. And it's because of these people who maintained this knowledge in secret. Thanks to them, they passed it down to certain people, like me, and we still have this knowledge. And I'm sharing it with you. Because this regards the sacred center. And we all have that. This is not a Lakota thing. This is a Ikje Oyate thing. Ikje Oyate means human being. When you live this way, you communicate as a human, not as a Lakota, not as a German, or a Japanese, or an African. You communicate as a human. That's really important to know. So, that's how it was back then. Now remember I said that the priest said to the Indians, we will help your children. So, they took the children away from the parents, sent them to boarding school hundreds of miles away, where these children were tortured to speak only English and learn the civilized Christian way. If they spoke about home, they were tortured. These schools didn't do background checks in those days. The pay was really low. So they got really no good teachers in these schools. A lot of these teachers were sadistic. They got sexual pleasure from torturing people. And here, this is like summer holiday camp for them. And the same thing for perverts. A lot of perverts now had their pick of the litter. And they could get away with it. That's what happened. A lot of these children were murdered, they were killed, they were raped, they were molested. And there's a lot of unmarked graves near these schools. Not all of these children are accounted for. So, those who made it through, what they learned was whatever they saw. Because a lot of these children never went back home. They were told by the priests that their families had died and that there was nobody there. And that broke their hearts. This is why some of these children, they were so sad they couldn't eat. And they ended up starving themselves to death. And those who made it through, like I said, they didn't really survive because they were not able to process all these emotional traumas that they experienced. They didn't know how, because the only adults that were around them were these unhealthy, abusive people, teachers, dorm matrons, cooks, janitors, priests. They were all unhealthy to them. That's all they knew. They learned how to become victims, and they learned how to become abusers to those who they considered weaker than themselves. So they didn't really survive. A lot of these children that made it through these schools, they had a lot of traumas that they didn't know how to deal with, because all they saw was abuse. That's what they learned. There was no adult healthy role models to emulate. And remember I said these children were told that their families were all dead. So they didn't go back during summer holiday. They just stayed at these schools and worked. So when they left these schools, they tried to live in mainstream America. Nobody accepted them. They would say, you're a heathen. You're a dirty Indian. So they couldn't even get jobs off the reservation. And when they went back to the reservation, to their people, they ran into more problems. Many, many times they were not even accepted by their own people because their own people were saying, "Oh, you're too white. You act like a white man." So they're caught in between. So a lot of them turn to alcohol to try to hide all of it, to try to forget everything. They turn to alcohol and then later drugs. There were some who tried to make it. They married each other because they knew each other went through the same thing. And they didn't want their children to go through what they went through. So they didn't teach them the language. They didn't teach them the culture. Those children, the children of these first generation boarding school people, those children are today's elders. When they were born, they didn't learn the language. They didn't learn Lakota Star knowledge. They never got the opportunity to. When you look at an old person on the reservation today, they're not the connection to the ancient past. No, they were born in a Christian background at a time when the reservations were strongly Christian. So this is what happened. That's a native experience that a lot of people don't realize. This is what happened all over America and Canada too. So the next generation, they are sent to boarding school too. No choice. It's a little bit better, but they're still abused. They're still getting treated really no good. And so they grow up, have children, and they don't teach their children anything. What can they teach them? They don't know anything concerning their own language. This is why today most people cannot speak their own language, and what little cultural information they know is Christianized, meaning it's dualistic, and it's not the original ancient form. Okay, so the first generation of Indian kids that were sent to boarding school, since all around them were unhealthy adults who did nothing but abuse them, they didn't receive healthy parenting. They missed things that they should have learned about life. So they're lacking emotional development. So when they grow up, and those who make it through these boarding schools and then they have children, those children are also lacking that emotional support, that emotional development, because the parents don't know how to do it. All they knew and all they learned was abuse. All they experienced in these schools was abuse. So they have a hard time trying to be a healthy parent. So they do the best that they can. But the children still are not receiving the proper emotional development, the experiences that healthy children should receive from healthy parents. They're still missing that. And so when that second generation grows up, they know even less concerning healthy parenting. And so their children receive even less. And every time this happens, the next generation becomes more dualistic than the previous one. So let me try to say that again. The first generation boarding school kids, they didn't receive proper parenting skills. So when they have children, their children are not receiving healthy training that they should be receiving. They're receiving even less than their parents. Now that second generation, when they grow up, see, they know even less. So when they have children, those children are receiving even less, and it gets worse with each generation, which also means that the less healthy emotional development they receive, the more dualistic they become. So with each generation is more becoming emotionally underdeveloped, they're also becoming more dualistic. So today, it's a huge mess on the reservation. As a whole, we're incredibly underdeveloped emotionally, and we are incredibly dualistic. We're quick to attack each other. We're quick to pull each other down. We're just like the rest of the civilized, dualistic world. Notice I didn't say white man, because this is all over the world. It's not just among white countries. It's all over the world. Wherever there is a dualistic ideology, where one gender is considered less than and property of the other gender, you're going to have incredibly underdeveloped emotional people, which equals incredibly dualistic people. And that is unhealthy. So that started by the time of the late 1800s on the reservation. To read more about Lakota Star Knowledge spirituality, you can read my book called Wichocha Otechike. You can see the book cover on the right side of this screen. This book contains the information to what I talk about on my Lakota spirituality videos. To purchase this book, please click below where it says Show More. Clicking on that link will open up the description below, and there you will see a link called To Purchase My Books. As you will see, it's an eBay link. Click on that eBay link, and there you will see the information to get this book. Lila Pila Mayelo. Thank you very much.